For 15 years, I thought I was living the dream I was supposed to want. A husband who worked hard, two kids who filled our days with chaos and joy, a house that we built piece by piece. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people admired. Even from the inside, for a long time, it felt safe. But somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing myself. I became mom and wife and caretaker, but I couldn't remember the last time I had simply been me. Our days were predictable. Wake up, get the kids ready, go to work, cook, clean, sleep. My husband and I shared a life, but not really ourselves anymore. We didn't talk about dreams or fears. We talked about bills, homework, and whose turn it was to buy groceries. Don't get me wrong, he's a good man. He never mistreated me, never raised a hand, never failed to show up for our children. But love isn't just about not being hurt. It's about being seen. And after years of being invisible in my own marriage, something in me grew restless. I didn't know it then, but that restlessness was the first crack, the beginning of everything that would later collapse. It began subtly, like a shadow I couldn't quite name. I'd sit at the window after the kids went to bed, staring at the streetlights, wondering when my life had turned into nothing but routines. My husband would be on the couch, sometimes dozing off, sometimes scrolling his phone, and I'd look at him and feel distance. He hadn't changed much, not really. He was steady, dependable, the same man I married, but maybe that was the problem. Nothing had changed, not even us. We were surviving, not living. And I couldn't shake the hollow feeling in my chest when I realized I couldn't remember the last time my heart raced around him, or even the last time we'd had a conversation that wasn't about chores or schedules. I started carrying my phone with me more, not because I had secrets yet, but because it became an escape. Social media, chats with old friends, mindless scrolling, anything to remind me that I was still alive, still someone other than mom or wife. He noticed, I think. He'd look at me sometimes with confusion, maybe even suspicion, but he never asked the questions I was too scared to answer. The truth was, I was drifting, not towards someone else yet, but away from myself and from him. And that distance, once it starts, is harder to close than anyone ever admits. It didn't take long for him to notice something was wrong. He never asked me directly. My husband isn't the type to pry, but his actions gave him away. Suddenly, there were flowers on the counter when I came home from work. He cooked dinner more often, fumbling with recipes he'd never tried before. He even left little notes for me in the mornings, the kind he used to write when we were newly married. I should have felt grateful, loved, seen. But instead, I felt guilty because every gesture reminded me of how far away I already was. His effort only highlighted the emptiness inside me, the truth that the spark he was trying to reignite had gone dim a long time ago. I smiled, I thanked him, I told him dinner tasted wonderful even when it didn't. But inside, I felt like a fraud. I wasn't responding the way a wife should. My hugs were shorter, my kisses lacked warmth. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't force what I no longer felt. And in the quiet of those evenings, watching him try so hard, I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. Was the problem him? Or was it me? The answer terrified me, because I knew, deep down, it was both. I wish I could say it was planned, that I walked into it with full awareness, but the truth is, it happened in a blur, a slow slide that felt harmless until it wasn't. There was a coworker, Nothing dramatic, nothing movie-like, just someone who noticed me. Someone who asked about my day and actually waited for the answer. Someone who saw more than the mom rushing to leave early for soccer practice or the wife who needed to pick up groceries on the way home. It started with small conversations at work, then messages after hours. I told myself it was innocent. Everyone needs friends, right? But I felt the excitement building, that flutter in my stomach I hadn't felt in years. And instead of pulling back, I clung to it. It made me feel alive again, like the version of myself I thought I had lost. The night it happened, it wasn't candlelight or seduction. It was exhaustion, loneliness, and one bad decision fueled by the desperate need to feel wanted. When it was over, reality hit me like a truck. I remember staring at myself in the mirror, disgusted, knowing I had just burned through 15 years of trust in a single moment. I went home to my husband and kids as if nothing had happened. I hugged them, smiled, tucked the kids into bed, but inside, I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. And the guilt didn't fade. It grew until it was too big to keep inside. I couldn't carry it anymore. Every time I looked at him, the weight pressed harder on my chest. He'd ask me simple questions. How was your day? And I'd choke on the answer because I knew it was wrapped in lies. Even the kids' laughter couldn't cut through the guilt that sat like a stone in my stomach. So one night, after they went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea that had gone cold long before I took a sip. He came in, tired from the day, and sat across from me. The silence stretched out until it felt like it would crush me. I need to tell you something, I whispered, and my hand shook as I held the cup. The words tumbled out in fragments. That it happened once, that I didn't love him, that it wasn't planned, that I regretted it the second it was over. I tried to make him understand it hadn't been about him, that it was about me being lost, about me craving to feel like a person again. But when the words left my mouth, I could see the life drain from his eyes. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He just sat there, his face pale, the silence louder than any anger could have been. And in that silence, I knew I had broken something sacred. I wanted to reach for him, to fall at his feet, to beg, but I didn't. Because some betrayals don't deserve begging. They just deserve honesty, no matter how much it destroys. The silence after my confession felt endless. He didn't scream, didn't demand details, didn't even ask why. He just stared at me like I was a stranger, like the woman he thought he knew had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. Then he stood. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, and without a word, he grabbed his jacket and left. The sound of the door closing behind him cut through me sharper than any insult could have. I sat frozen at the kitchen table, my tea cold, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my throat. I wanted to run after him, to stop him, to throw myself at his feet and beg him not to leave. But I couldn't move. Shame pinned me to that chair. I knew I had no right to ask for anything from him anymore. Not forgiveness, not comfort, not even his presence. I spent that night pacing the house, checking on the kids every hour just to remind myself there was still something left worth protecting. I imagined him walking under streetlights, alone with his thoughts, picturing all the ways I had betrayed him. Every passing minute made me wonder if he'd ever come back. When he finally did, just as the sky was turning pale, he didn't look at me. He went straight upstairs to check on the children, his shoulders heavy, his face unreadable. That's when it sunk in. Even if he stayed in this house, even if we carried on for the kids, the man I married had left me that night, and I didn't know if I'd ever get him back. The days that followed felt like punishment carved into routine. We still lived under the same roof, still played the roles of mom and dad, but everything between us was fractured. He barely spoke to me unless it was about the kids. When he looked at me, it was like he was staring through a ghost. I tried to reach for him. I'd brush against his arm in the kitchen, linger a little longer when I handed him his coffee, whisper apologies at night when I thought maybe he'd soften if he heard how much I hated myself for what I'd done. But his body stayed stiff, his face unreadable, his heart locked away behind walls I had built myself. Nights were the worst. We used to fall asleep wrapped in each other. Now there was an ocean of silence between us on that same mattress. Sometimes I'd scroll my phone late into the night just so I wouldn't lie awake listening to his steady breathing, wondering if he was dreaming of the man I'd betrayed him with. Other times, the guilt would swell until I cried into my pillow as quietly as I could. The children didn't understand, but they felt it. Our oldest asked me why Dad never laughed anymore. Our youngest clung to me more than ever, as if she could sense that something was slipping away. And every day, I carried the weight of knowing I had created this silence. I had turned our marriage into a house filled with strangers. And I didn't know if time or love or anything at all could bring us back from it. I couldn't take the silence anymore, the pretending. The way we went about our days like roommates keeping up appearances for the children. Every smile felt like a mask. Every family dinner was a performance. And every time I looked at him, I saw the question in his eyes that he refused to ask. Was I still his wife, or just the woman who broke him? One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table again, the same table where everything had first unraveled. He sat across from me, his shoulders slumped, exhaustion written into the lines of his face. For a long time, neither of us spoke, until I finally forced the words out. I can't keep living like this. We have to decide something. He didn't explode, he didn't accuse. Instead, his voice was low and ragged as he told me he couldn't trust me. That even if it had been just once, even if I swore it meant nothing, the image of me with someone else haunted him every single day. That my mistake wasn't just a mistake. It had poisoned everything. I nodded because what could I say? Every word out of his mouth was the truth. And the part that hurt most was that I'd seen it coming long before I ever crossed the line. I had felt myself drifting, and I had let it happen anyway. That night, I realized we were standing on a cliff edge. One step closer together might save us, but one step back and we would both fall. And for the first time, I admitted to myself that love alone might not be enough to keep us standing. I'll never forget the sound of the zipper. It was late, the kids were asleep, and I was folding laundry when I heard it from the bedroom. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then I walked in and saw him, standing by the closet with a small bag, his hands moving with a kind of calm finality that terrified me more than if he'd been screaming. He didn't look at me when I asked what he was doing. He just said, "I can't breathe in this house anymore." His voice was steady, but I could see the pain in the way his shoulders shook. Panic clawed at my chest. I rushed to him, my words tumbling out, begging him not to go. I told him I knew I had destroyed something sacred, but that I was willing to do anything, counseling, full honesty, rebuilding brick by brick, if only he would give me the chance. For a moment, I thought he was going to walk right past me. My heart stopped when his hand reached for the doorknob, but then he froze. He closed his eyes, let out a breath that sounded like it carried the weight of 15 years, and slowly set the bag down. He didn't say he forgave me. He didn't even say he was staying for me. He whispered, "For the kids," and walked past me into the living room. That night, lying in bed, I realized he hadn't chosen me. He had chosen them. And as much as I wanted to believe love could fix everything, I knew then that I was no longer the reason he was still here. I thought we were hiding it well. We still showed up for soccer games, clapped at school plays, smiled in family photos, but children see more than we give them credit for, and mine started to notice the cracks. Our oldest asked me one night, so casually it broke my heart, "Why doesn't Dad laugh anymore?" I felt the question cut right through me. I wanted to say it was just stress, that adults get tired, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. He knew, not the details, but the distance. Kids don't need explanations. They feel the truth in the air around them. Our youngest became clingier. She started following me from room to room, asking if I was okay, crawling into our bed at night. At first, I thought she just wanted comfort, but then I realized she was looking for reassurance that her little world wasn't about to fall apart. I did my best to keep it together for them. I laughed louder at their jokes, smiled wider at bedtime, tried to keep the illusion of normalcy alive. But every time I caught my husband watching me across the room, I knew he saw the performance too. And that's when the guilt twisted even deeper, because I hadn't just betrayed him, I had betrayed them too. Our family was breaking, and no matter how many bedtime stories I read or cookies I baked, I couldn't glue it back together. I was the one who suggested it. Therapy. Not because I believed it would magically fix us, but because I couldn't stand the thought of giving up without trying. I told him we owed it to the kids and maybe to ourselves to see if there was anything left to salvage. He agreed, though not with hope, more like resignation, as if saying no would mean admitting the final nail was already in the coffin. We sat in that office like two strangers who had once known everything about each other. I felt small, nervous, ashamed. He looked guarded, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. When it was my turn, I spoke about guilt, about how much I hated myself for what I'd done, how the mistake wasn't about him at all, but about me being lost in motherhood, in routines, in a version of myself that felt invisible. I said I still loved him, that I wanted to fight for us, even if I had been the one to set fire to what we built. When it was his turn, he didn't hold back. He spoke of betrayal, of how every touch felt tainted now, of how even when I said I love you, he could only hear it as a lie. Listening to him hurt more than any punishment I could have imagined, because it was proof that I hadn't just broken trust, I had broken him. The therapist said healing was possible, that trust could be rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. But the drive home was silence, and deep down, I wondered if therapy was helping us at all, or if it was only showing us the depth of the ruins we were standing in. I went in believing therapy might be a lifeline, but what I didn't realize is that sometimes healing means reopening wounds that were barely scabbed over. And that's what those sessions became, not stitches, but salt. Every week, the same cycle. I confessed my guilt, how I regretted what I'd done, how it wasn't about him, but about me losing myself. He listened, but his eyes stayed hard. When it was his turn, he spoke truths I could barely endure. He said he pictured me with that man every time I walked into a room. He said he couldn't hold me without feeling contaminated, that my touch was a reminder of everything he'd lost in one night. I wanted to believe the therapist's optimism, that trust could be rebuilt, that marriages had survived worse. But as I sat across from my husband, watching him speak with such raw pain, I realized he wasn't moving closer to me. He was moving further away. Therapy wasn't knitting us back together. It was forcing us to stare at the fractures we both wished we could ignore. And every silent car ride home, I felt it clearer. This wasn't saving us. It was exposing just how broken we already were. For so long, the thought of losing him felt impossible. He had been my anchor through college, through pregnancies, through every chapter of adulthood that shaped me. He wasn't just my husband. He was the constant in a life that kept changing around us. But after therapy, after the endless silences and the nights we shared a bed without touching, I started to wonder what it would be like to let go. Not out of anger, not even out of punishment, but out of mercy. For him, for me, for the kids who were watching two ghosts perform a marriage. I'd picture it sometimes while folding laundry or sitting in the car outside the grocery store. A small apartment with just me and the kids, waking up without that crushing tension in the room, not having to see the distrust in his eyes every time I said his name. The thought used to terrify me. Now it felt almost like relief. And then I realized something that broke me even more. He was probably imagining the same thing, that life apart from me might mean peace, even if it also meant pain. I hated myself for thinking it, but deep down, a part of me knew maybe the kindest thing we could do for each other was stop trying to force what had already died. For months after my confession, he had been the one holding the line, not with love, but with duty. He stayed because of the children, because leaving felt like too violent a fracture. Even in his silence, I could feel the weight of his resistance, as though part of him was still trying to fight against the unraveling. But one evening, something shifted. We were sitting on opposite sides of the couch, the TV flickering between us, and for the first time, he didn't glance at me, didn't try to gauge my expression, didn't even seem to care that I was there. It wasn't anger, it wasn't tension, it was absence. Later that night, when I tried to talk, another clumsy attempt at connection, another whispered apology, he didn't argue. He didn't push back. He just looked at me with tired eyes and said, "I don't know if I have anything left to give you." The words were soft, but they landed like a hammer, because in that moment, I knew he was imagining life without me too, and unlike before, he wasn't afraid of it anymore. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, realizing that the man I'd once built a life with was finally loosening his grip. And I had no idea if I should reach harder for him or finally admit that letting go was the only way left to set us both free. It didn't end with screaming or slammed doors. There were no dramatic ultimatums, no tearful reconciliations. It ended the same way so much of our marriage had existed in those final months, quietly, almost gently, like a flame burning itself out. We sat at the kitchen table, the place where it had all unraveled months before. This time there was no anger, no begging, no false promises. Just two people who had shared a life, finally admitting to each other that what they had built together couldn't be saved in the way we wanted it to. We agreed for the kids' sake we would keep the peace, that birthdays and holidays would be filled with love, even if not shared under the same roof. He stayed in the house with them, and I moved into my sister's spare room. Packing my things felt surreal. 15 years of memories reduced to boxes and bags. I wanted to cry, but I think I had already cried myself dry long before that mistake. The first night apart, the silence felt brutal. I reached for him out of habit, only to find nothing but an empty mattress. But then, slowly, I also felt something else. Space. Space to breathe. space to confront who I had become and who I wanted to be. I'll never excuse what I did. I broke something sacred, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But I also know this. I had already been lost long before that mistake, and maybe losing him, losing us, was the only way I could finally find myself again. We weren't perfect. We weren't forever, but we were real. And that, even in its ending, is something I will always hold on to.